Hello and welcome back everyone, Joso's here, back again with another Smart Doll sewing video. Today we'll be making this bustier with a cutout. I would say a heart cutout, but that is debatable. Without further ado, let's jump in. So I'm going to be showing you how to create your pattern from the fitted dress pattern that I provided in a previous video for the fitted dress DIY. Alright, so here it is. And this is kind of how it's going to look. This is my first sample. Second, and the heart isn't as defined as I'd like since this fabric is a little thin, so it doesn't hold its form as well. From a distance it's kind of, it passes, but up close it's like eh. But you know, still a moment. Alright, so to get started we're gonna go ahead and create these pattern pieces, which is what we're gonna need. It's front, back, facing, and little stencil for the piece that's gonna line the cutout. And to start off, we're gonna go ahead and square off pattern right where the midpoint of the start is, and we're going to be joining these two dart points and squaring them off. Now we're going to add some seam allowance, and we're only adding a lot right here. It's not the measure, just make sure to get them out, because we need to cut out the darts with that little peak at the bottom in order for them to reach the bottom of the seam allowance and not have them be like too short. Sounds confusing, but I'll explain in a bit. Okay. Alright, so we have our two pieces. Oh, well, alright. So to make sure that we cut this right, we're going to go ahead and fold both legs of the dart. Then one fold right at the center, and as you can see, the legs just kind of meet as if you had sewn that dart. Now what we're gonna do is kind of square off and blend this line and trim. Actually, don't trim yet, add your seam allowance. Then trim. And as you can see, you get like a little tiny peak, and what that peak does is makes sure that the end of the dart kind of meets up with the rest of the seam allowance. Otherwise it would kind of be like up here and it won't kind of be nice. It won't, just don't do that. Alright, then we're gonna go ahead and fold the other leg and repeat the process. And we blend. And then right before you cut, I want you to fold the side dart the same way we folded the other ones, and make sure you match up the side seams just to see where you need to cut. And as you can see right here, it ends right where our seam allowance is, the new mark, so we won't have to add any seam allowance to this one, just cut, since they're already matched up at the seam, the side seam right here. And try not to get these confused, so I would label them center back, since the back piece is a little trickier to find. Like, you could get really confused. I already did this once. I ended up, let's not get into it, but yeah, so mark your center back, that way when you match up your side seams you don't confuse the wrong side. As you can see, it ends right here, so all we have to do is fold and cut, and we know that the seam allowance is already there. As you can see, the peak is way more defined on this one, and it just makes sure that it's lined up. Okay. A few more touches I'm gonna do are, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of fix this neckline. I'm gonna fold this up. Oh, no. kind of just want to make it way more like rounder. You don't have to do this, I just wanted to define the cup a little better. And now I'm going to match it up to the side seam again. And as you can see, it's not matched up anymore because we removed some from the top. So I'm going to remove that same amount from the bottom and from the top of the back part and kind of blend it into the rest. Alright, now when we match up the side seams, make sure that the dart's folded when you do that. They are the same measurement. I don't know why this one has like this crazy little point. And bam, they match up. Now that we have our pattern pieces done, let's go ahead and add the cutout. I kind of like to wing it, honestly, just kind of draw it in there. I will say, make sure that the point at the top of the heart is more defined than normal. That way, when you go to sew it, you can see it. If it's like a little tiny like point, it'll get lost in the fabric and the sewing and all like the little excess bunching and stuff like that. So it'll kind of mellow out like it did here. Trust me, I had a point in there, but it's just too much fabric for it to come out and just won't do it. So keep that in mind. Alright, so now we have our heart. And for this part, I recommend you use some sort of cardstock or manilla folder. Fold it in half. And put the heart you traced right at the fold and trace it once again. Alright. Cut it out. I like to square off the sides, make sure they're nice and neat. Now you have a nice little stencil, and you kind of see how your heart's gonna look as well for the little piece that's gonna line the cutout. Alright, next step we're gonna do is, since this is gonna be like a bustier type of thing, where we want it to be a little smaller than a normal fit of like a crop top, that way it builds tension when we lace it up. So, I know it sounds a little confusing, but just trust me. Let's go ahead and remove. Right now I'm removing 3/4 of an eighth, 3/8 of an inch. And in centimeters, I just want to be exact. I'm gonna go ahead and measure that. Ends up being about exactly 1 centimeter. Remove a centimeter from the back, or 3/8 of an inch. Then that previous line we made is going to be basically redundant. We don't need it anymore. It doesn't stand for anything. Oh man. Alright, and we redraw the center back line. And mark it so we don't forget. Alright, now that we have these pieces, let's go ahead and make the facing. Now for the facing, it's basically going to be this piece. And what it does, it's a way to line or kind of finish off the neckline of the top. Kind of wanted to get into how we're going to finish, the ways you could kind of finish off this top. You could either do the facing like I mentioned, or you can go ahead and cut 2 of each piece and do like a full lining. You could even do like a different color, so like that little cutout, once it's cut out and you sew the lining on, make sure it's a different color so like the heart will show like the other fabric. It's gonna be super cute. So that's another way you can do it. There's so many ways you can finish this off, honestly, but I'm gonna go ahead and show you in the video how to do the lining. First thing I'm gonna do in order to start working on the lining, to make the facing, not lining, let's go ahead and tape off the side seam dart. And when we're doing that, because once we close it, we get the actual measurement for the seam allowance. Then we're gonna mark 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter, since that's our actual seam allowance measurement, and we need to get it out of the way in order to make the facing. Since when we add the facing, this is going to be sewn, so adding this excess seam allowance into the facing will make it way too big. So we're going to pretend this is a sewn piece and remove the seam allowance, fold it out of the way. And once it's folded out of the way, we can go ahead and get that fold, match it up with the other seam allowance, and that's kind of replicating the size it's going to be once it's cut out. Not cut out, once it's sewn. Once it's sewn together, it kind of gets rid of that excess, and as you can see, my other facing could fit into it, but this is for a different pattern, so it's not going to fit this one specifically. Each one's going to have to make its own. So I have a paper over here that I'm going to reach for and get. Match the front. To like a squared edge, and then just kind of trace the neckline as best as you can. It will be hard to lay it flat since we have that dart folded and taped down, that side dart right here, which kind of gives it that third dimension, that 3D dimension, and makes it hard for it to lay flat. But the general measurement of the neckline will always be the same regardless of this part is popping up or not. So that's my cap. And alright, so this is basically the lining. Not the lining, the facing. This is the facing. Facing. Gotta remember that. I keep saying lining. Alright. There it is. And once you get the neckline, it's really up to you to determine how much you want that to kind of go down. But since we have a cutout, we're going to try to prevent that getting in the way of the cutout. So I'm going to do about 1/2 inch, and I keep forgetting how much that is in centimeters. Don't want to give you guys the wrong one. So it's 1.5 inches, centimeter and a half. You could do 1.5 centimeters if you do centimeters. Well, actually, a little bit under 1/2 centimeter, 1/4, I believe, around there. A little bit past a centimeter, or 1/2 inch. And what this does, it helps it get line it properly. As you can see, it kind of ends right above the point of the heart. Perfect. That's what's going to be showing. Now we're going to add the seam allowance. And if you're thinking that's going to make it, pop up and show, no, it's not, because we are going to fold this up into itself while we're sewing. It's going to be encased, so we won't be seeing any of that. Alright, so right now you can kind of see how that seam allowance is right there, but since we're folding it up, it'll match up perfectly to the point and it won't show. And if you're prone to getting confused like I am, go ahead and measure it. Center back, center front, heart, bustier, facing, not lining. Alright. And yeah, alright. We don't have to add a seam allowance at the top since it's already the measurement of the neckline, and we're gonna sew it on so both the neckline of the piece and the facing are gonna lose this entire amount when we sew it, since that seam allowance is already accounted for. In essence, giving us a little bit tiny amount that's gonna be showing after we fold it into itself. So it's gonna be perfect. and you may end up with really messy pattern pieces after you work on them, so it's kind of standard to kind of make a neater piece after you've made your first initial ones that work. I do it, that's why I normally have like these little manilla versions of the patterns I give away, since I feel like they're easier to trace and they maintain their shape a lot better than regular paper. And I, for the life of me, cannot undo the start. And just like that, we have our front, back facing, and our part stencil. And these are the pattern pieces we need in order to make this project happen. Alright, and I think we're ready to start sewing. Alrighty, so the first step would be to go ahead and trace out all of your pieces, and once you cut them out, go ahead and sew all of the darts. Once those darts are all sewn up, go ahead and give them a good press. Alright, so this was my first attempt, not my very best. Had some troubleshooting to do, but now I can show you how to do it, and hopefully nothing will go wrong this time. Alright. So as you can see, you can't really tell the outline, and it doesn't really matter since you're going to be stitching around this one. Make sure the right sides are facing each other. Center it wherever you want. And once you have that in place, go ahead and add some pins. Just put it in the corners so it doesn't get in the way of the presser foot when I'm stitching. Make sure your stitches are small, and by stitches being small I mean your stitch length. Alright. And then you just work your way all around. I like to walk my foot manually, and if you don't know what that means, that's spinning the wheel of the machine on my own by hand, instead of pressing down on my presser foot and having that sew for me. And I don't completely stop using my presser foot for my machine when doing this, since, sorry, the light's not that great on it. Move the camera. Since I need my I still need to use the presser foot a little bit, I slightly press my foot down, and that helps it be a little easier for me to manually turn the wheel. And on this end right here, it's like a straight line, so I feel more comfortable just pressing down. Alright. And there's the heart. We stitched all around. Now, the next step is to carefully cut all of the inside out. The last time I did this, my stitch length was super big, and I think that's why my fabric kind of frayed and undid itself at the stitching. this time I kinda have a plan. This plan won't work for all materials, probably just synthetic ones. And I'll be right back. And I'll be right back. I'm going to show you one more trick that hopefully will make this work a little better and prevent any stitches falling out. Alright, I'm going to try to use this little lighter. And kind of, fumes. Kind of melt all the little fibers into themselves to kind of prevent frayage. You can see all the little hairs kind of just melted into each other, and I'm hoping that will prevent frayage. We also got really in there, like really into the side, the stitching, so I'm hoping that's also gonna help us not mess it up. And now I'm gonna also fray the ends here. Ugh, the fumes, I can't. Alright, and as you can see, the edge is not fraying as much. Alright, now let's pull it through. And as you can see, there's one little stitch that kind of went over. Actually, it's a few. I think the easiest thing to do is just kind of like finger press it as you go. Kind of force it to kind of fold there. As you can see, that point here needs to be way more defined in order for it to kind of like show, you know? Because this is the point. It's not listening. So I'm going to do a few little snips. Oh yeah, that helps. Maybe some snips over here will help as well. Like right here. And there we go. I guess the snips was all I needed. And while it's not perfect, I think it's better than this one. I really want that point to come through. And this is where I messed it up last time. I was trying to force that point through, but I think this time it's a little more secured and it won't mess it up as bad. And before I do anything else, I'm gonna go ahead and press this. It might help it, keep its form in the same place a little more. Alright, so here it is. I'm hoping a good little press will help it stay in place. Alright, once you have your little cutout perfectly made, well, I don't know about perfect, but you know what I mean. Go ahead and sew your side seams. And at this point, go ahead and separate the back pieces if you drew them on next to each other on your fabric. You don't have to do this. You could go ahead and trace out 2 pieces and cut them from the beginning. But I find it easier to not get confused when I do that. See, like I said, I'm already getting confused, but no. It's center back is the wider part. Alright, and we sew the side seams.
It was at this moment that he knew.
I sewed this wrong. What's going on with me today? Alright. So I accidentally sewed this wrong sides together. And now we can do it right. Okay, right sides together. And right sides together. Alright, and here we have the full pieces. Now, we can go ahead and add our facing. Before I do that, I'm gonna go ahead and serge my side seams. Alright, serge the side seams. And now we can add the facing. There it is. Right sides together. And to pin at the center front. And I'm going to start off at the middle. Okay. And if you're wondering why, it's because directional sewing can be important in things like this. If I was to start at this end and work my way all the way to the back, it would kind of shift the fabric a bit, knowing how shifty this is. So I'm going to start at the middle, work my way out, and middle, work my way out on from each side. Alright, once your facing's all sewn up, you can go ahead and cut the corners. I'm going to do the same thing I did to the other facing for the heart. Cut. Alright, and might as well, why not? ahead and give this a good press so it stays. So now that we ironed the facing to the back, we're going to go ahead and stitch down the seam allowance from the neckline onto the facing. So the main reason why I suggested you guys don't sew the side seams of the facing earlier was because we still need to get in there and sew down the seam allowance onto the facing, and also the way I sewed it on was kind of backwards and it kind of exposes the seam allowance when I was supposed to flip it over and stitch it down like that. You'll see later on. And that just helps the facing lay down flat and it prevents it from moving around. I'm gonna flip this over one last time and serge the ends. So I serge the sides and the bottom. Once you serge the sides, all you do is flip it back and bam. Once it's flipped, we're going to go ahead and top stitch this. As you can see, it's still showing. So I'm going to fold it into itself. And once you get to this corner, just fold one end and then fold it right over itself to keep that point. And if you did your facing right, it should end right above the heart. But I'm going to move this up, the little flap of the heart, cut out, move it up, and then layer this over it. That way when we go around and stitch this, it'll catch the little end of the cutout and it'll help us keep it in place. And it should look something like this with everything folded all around. So, fold it into itself all the way around. Honestly, I should have folded it before I hemmed this back part, but it's all good. Alright, this is the other side, and I'm just going to top stitch all along. This is how the back looks. we're gonna go ahead and hem the bottom part. Alright, and here I have May, my Clarity, wearing the sample. And I didn't think this one looked like a heart at first, but this one looks way more like a heart than this one, in all honesty. Honestly, it just looks like a cutout. Which is still kind of cute. Not what we're going for. I'm gonna add some stitches right here to hopefully it'll keep it down. I ended up adding 2 stitch lines, not even. Doesn't matter, I'm kind of over it. As you can see, it just keeps it down in place. Alright, so for the future, I recommend that you guys make the total length of that little piece that gets shifted to the back after you kind of trim out the heart. Make it long enough to kind of reach the neckline and the hem, so when you sew both parts, you kind of catch it in there and you're all set. Alright, so I think making it bigger might make it easier to sew. Let's try it out. Alrighty, y'all, since I did not like my first 2 samples that much, I'm gonna go ahead and sew one last sample and kind of like see if I could make it work with the bigger heart, but also to serve this as like a quick recap for you guys, so that when you guys go and sew this, it's a lot easier for you to remember all the steps. So for the sake of time, I already sewed the darts, so I'm gonna go ahead and start from the cutout. Remember to keep your stitch length small and take your time sewing all around. So once your heart is sewn, go ahead and cut as close as you can to the stitching, and go ahead and use your lighter to kind of melt all the little fibers. Only do this if your material is synthetic, and do not forget to test it on a separate piece before you do it. All fabrics react to fire differently, and I'm lucky that this one works amazing. So to make it a lot easier to flip it over, go ahead and snip any curves and snip into any areas of the seam allowance that you see any little tension, and that's usually what causes resistance and makes it a lot easier for the fabric to kind of lay flat. So to sew the facing, go ahead and pin the center front, and the side seams are optional, you don't have to. I didn't do that for this part, but you could if you want. And then work your way from the middle out on both sides. And then sometimes when I start at the middle of like a neckline, I don't always get the peak in the center front perfect. So I always start off a little bit past the peak and kind of go back in there and then sew it as best as I can. And now that we're done with that, let's go ahead and stitch the seam allowance to the facing. I then quickly serged my side seams and the ends of the top. And for that little fold, remember last time I just stitched over it, but this time I'm folding it up so that when we flip it over, it's gonna go ahead and be encased in the facing, and it won't look as crazy, like, you know, it won't be showing the seam allowance like I did last time, and it'll fold all nicely. And once you stitch that down, do not forget to clip your corners, that way when you flip it over, you get a nice point, and then start working on your facing and folding it into itself. This time I didn't sew the end of the top before starting the facing, so that's why I'm struggling a little more than usual, since I gotta hold both of them in place, as you can see in the video. While pinning, do not forget to make sure that the end of the little cutout piece is under the little facing fold. That way when you stitch over it, it gets caught in there and it's not moving around. And once you finish that, go ahead and stitch down the ends and hem the top. And to finish this off, let's go ahead and add a closure. I will be using eyelets. You don't have to use this. If you don't have these, you can go ahead and use the eyes of like hook and eyes. You just use the eyes evenly, so stitch them on, or we'll hand sew them. And then you could just lace that up with whatever ribbon you'd like, and it has the same effect. And I know I totally messed up the placement on those eyelets right here, but don't come for me, y'all. I was having a rough day, a rough sewing day. And very quickly, I just want to show you how I laced her up, and I just noticed that my boyfriend left a packet of hot sauce in the back of my shot. I don't know what he was thinking, but we're gonna have a talk about that. Oh gosh. And shout out to my aunt for sending me the hot sauce from Mexico though. Thank you guys so much for watching today. I really appreciate it. Please don't forget to leave a like and comment below what your favorite part of today's video was. If you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe as well. See you guys next time. And if you're still in the mood to watch more Smart Doll sewing content or simply want to hang out, go ahead and click any of the playlists on screen now. Thank you.